Good evening and welcome to our Founders Forum. My name is Richard Sechrist. I'm with Planning and Redevelopment Department. This is the fifth in the series of forums hosted by the Virgin Valley Historical Committee, where we have an opportunity to invite in some of the prominent and longtime residents to record their oral histories, to ask questions, and kind of document life in Mesquite over the years. And tonight, Geraldine Zarate is going to be the moderator, and our guest speaker, Verl Frehner. And I'll turn the time over to Geraldine.
Welcome. We're glad that you could join us here, and we welcome the audience that is watching from home. This is my first endeavor at being a moderator of this panel. The person that we usually ask was not able to, so we'll give it a try. I feel very comfortable here. I'm a fourth-generation Mesquite resident, and so I have grown up with Frehners all my life and loved them. They're wonderful people, and I especially know Verl's family and his parents, and they were special people. And so it's really a pleasure to welcome tonight Verl Frehner, who I don't really want to introduce because I don't want to spoil any of his story. So we're going to get to know Verl by the questions that he'll answer for us tonight. So, Mr. Verl Frehner, who were the earliest members of your family to live in Mesquite?
My father tells me that he was a boy when his father left Littlefield, Arizona, and brought the cattle and headed down the road to Mesquite. He also told me that as he entered Mesquite with his cattle and so forth, there were 2 or 3 young boys came up to him and says, "You shouldn't be here. Get out of here." Anyway, we stayed.
And about when was that?
You mean year-wise?
Year-wise, yeah.
I'm not really sure.
Okay, and how about your grandparents? Did they live here?
Yes, my grandparents moved in to Mesquite from Littlefield, Arizona. My father was just a boy at the time, I said. And my grandparents and their parents, of course, were the ones who settled Littlefield at the time. But Littlefield was too little to maintain a large group of people, so they ended up moving to broader acreages here in Mesquite.
And what part of Mesquite did they live in, your grandparents?
My grandparents lived...
What's there now? That's
yeah. Everything is gone there now, except they're building a new movie theater, I think.
It's about the area of the new movie theater down on the boulevard, yeah. And what did your grandparents do? Was your grandfather a farmer?
Basically a farmer and somewhat of a cattle rancher at times. And I remember many times early in the mornings, we'd hear his baler out baling the alfalfa early in the morning while the dew was still on the hay. And that seemed to be my greatest remembrance because it lasted so many years, his working early in the mornings like that.
Was your father helping on the farm there?
He had his farm of his own, and he also did some ranching and animal raising for sale in Los Angeles.
Now, your mother was from the valley too, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was from Bunkerville.
And her maiden name was?
Levitt.
Levitt. And she was from the Dudley Levitt family?
Dudley Levitt, yes, the Levitt line, yes.
And was Juanita Levitt Brooks her sister?
Yes, my mother's sister was Juanita Brooks.
Yeah. And so you were born here, though you did tell me you were born in St. George, like a lot of the babies were because of medical reasons. So you've grown up here in Mesquite, haven't you?
Yes. I'm not so sure if we could use the term "grown up," but I existed
Became
here.
of age.
Right.
And what's some of your memories of growing up in Mesquite?
Well, I've had a lot of memories. Many of them, of course, are related to the events of the time and the historical events of the time. I remember in particular, I was exposed to the bombing of Pearl Harbor as a boy, first grader. And my second day after the bombing of the Pearl Harbor, I was at school, and my friends and the schoolmates came up to me and told me about it, assuming I didn't know about it, I suppose. But Actually, first grade was held in the gymnasium building that is still here, and the room to the left was first grade, the room to the right was second grade.
Who was your teacher? Do you remember?
I'll never forget the teacher. My mind has gone blank, but she was a.
It wasn't Daisy Reber, was it?
No, she was a little bit later.
A little
I think
later.
second later.
Okay.
But this, and I'm ashamed of this, I can't remember the name, but she was a spinster, and she was
Edith Knight?
Edith Knight. Yes, first teacher.
A lot of our teachers, yeah. She was- And so that day after Pearl Harbor, then you remember being in school at that classroom?
Yes. Of course, the gravity of that event was hard to understand as a child, but the seriousness that my parents took it and my other adult people impressed me very greatly. The seriousness of it.
And it affected life here in the valley. Do you remember rationing?
Absolutely, rationing was a great part of the Second World War and the economy at the time. I remember the little booklets we used to tear out little stamps to buy things with. Gasoline was rationed. Some food articles were rationed, and most of the luxury items, of course, were not available or rationed to a certain extent.
You know, and families that had a lot of children. You had, how many children, siblings did you have?
There were 11 of us.
11.
Mhm.
So you had a big family that needed to be supported with rationing, and your father had a farm. I know that he did other things too, though.
Yes. At that time, we lived at the east end of Mesquite, across the canal from the police station. And he had a business of raising pigs at the time, and would raise them and later take them to Los Angeles in his truck to sell. We'd leave early in the evening when the sun was going down and travel all night long to keep the animals cool, and arrive in the stockyards down there just as the sun rose, and met the people that we were to sell them to, and then return home.
Did you go sometimes?
Yes, I did. I rode them.
Boy, you're a little town boy seeing the big city of Los Angeles.
Oh, yes.
Even if it was the stockyards.
The highlight of the trip would be stop by the orange juice stands and give them a nickel or a dime for a big glass of juice.
In those days, you'd drive through a lot of groves to get to Los Angeles. Yeah.
A lot of them.
And did you have other brothers go with you? Were there?
Usually we took turns, so there wasn't too many people in the cab of the pickup truck at the time. But my mother very seldom was able to go because she had so many children to take care of. But one time, later in life, as I grew a little bit older, she did go and left us all the kids home.
Well, good for them. Well, did that provide, did that pig business provide a pretty good living, do you think, for your family?
Well, there was no such thing as a good living at that time. Everything and everybody was under the same economic circumstances, as near as I could tell. And even the local grocer, who was Lloyd Abbott at the time, before and after others, I found out of necessity to what we used to call cash and carry. You could pay for the food that you bought with cash, or you had to take a notepad out and write down the fact that you had bought this food and you'd pay for it later. And so many times we'd have to cash and carry, or we'd have to cash, and many times we'd have to carry, and so forth.
Yeah. Do you think Mesquite was a good place to grow up? Do you have good memories?
I do, because we worked hard, and all of us worked hard. One thing that I really remember as I traveled down the highway on my bare feet from my home on the ranch to school and so forth, or to the store or to church or whatever it may be. The other side of, the west side of where the Smith's Food King now stands, was a Texaco service station. And they had a grove of trees there that gave shade and comfort to travelers as well as local people. As I passed by one day, there was a car stopped, and the man and the woman inside the car was fanning themselves with their fans like they were about ready to die. Must have been in the summertime sometime. And they looked at me and says, "You live here?" And I says, "Yes." And they says, "What do you do here?" It startled me because we were always busy.
Yeah.
We were always doing something, and what do they mean by what did we do here? Well, yeah, they said, what? There's no place to go. There's nothing to do. And I said, in my own mind, I thought, well, let's see. I feed the pigs in the morning. I milk the cows. I go to school. I come home from school and I weed the weeds around the meat patch. And if I have time enough to eat supper before I go to bed, what do I do here? That's what I do here.
It's hard to imagine. And with as hot as it was and no cooling that, we grew up with, really, no cooling. It was, I know a lot of travelers thought that. And you went to high school, where you're in the Bunkerville, when the high school was over at Bunkerville, right?
Yes.
And how did you get over there?
The bus system was used, working at that time, and so we had good transportation. My father sometimes, during that time, drove the school bus, too, which is logical because he had a large family and there was at the end of town. He could start there and go across town and not to Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And so forth.
So when did you graduate from high school?
We use the word graduate. I think more appropriately we say social promotions.
When it became time to graduate. And what did you do after that? Did you leave Mesquite?
Well, I was called on a mission. And after my mission, I was called in the Army. And after the Army, I was lost, with nothing to do, and nowhere to go, and no money to do anything with. It's a strange thing because even though the Depression was basically before the Second World War, the Depression after my graduation seemed to be almost as bad. This is kind of a personal story, but let me tell it to you anyway, because my dear grandmother Mary Levitt, who lived to be 103 years old, came to me one day and she says, "Verl," she says, "I want you to go to college." And I says, "Well, Grandma, that's a good idea, but I don't have any money. My grandpa, my mom and dad didn't have any money." And she says, "Well, Verl," she says, "I've been scraping and saving, and I have saved $100. I'll give this $100 to you, and I want you to go to college." I took that $100 and went to the College of Southern Utah at the time. And based on my previous attempts at college, I was still under the social promotion aspect of my experience. And I had to prove myself some way, so I enrolled in some classes and I studied real hard, and I organized a little group of students to study together. And this particular class had 70 some odd students in it, a large class for beginnings kids. First test came out, the results of the first test, I was number 2 or 3 down on the low end of the scale. I improved myself a little bit over the time, each time getting a little better grade. By the end of the quarter, and they were in quarter system at that time, I was the high man in the class, which made me believe in myself. And my grandmother's belief in me too. So.
Well, what a wonderful grandma to launch you onto a life like that. And so then what did you do? Now that you believed in yourself and you were in college, what did you decide to do with that?
The College of Southern Utah at the time only had one 4-year program, and that was in elementary education. So I graduated in elementary education.
And then what did you do?
Well, I got a job in Las Vegas, and...
Did you feel like it was kind of coming home? I mean, going to Las Vegas and living?
Well, it was close enough to home. And Las Vegas was small at the time. Let me revert myself just back to my earlier days with my father when I was still a young boy, and my father raised alfalfa, hay, And he would take a load of alfalfa hay down to Las Vegas. And Las Vegas was so small that 2 blocks east of Fremont Street was a cow dairy, cows and everything. And he pulled in that cow dairy farm and sell his alfalfa to the dairy people. And so that's how small Las Vegas was at the time. A man jumped on the running board of the pickup we were driving, pickup truck, and he says, "I'd like to trade you 40 acres of land on the highway here for this load of hay." And I think he was pointing down near the center of town or maybe the strip somewhere. And my dad says, "There's no water out there. The land won't grow hay."
Oh.
And so he says, "No thanks," anyway.
So you knew about Las Vegas anyway. So how long did you live in Las Vegas when you...
Probably about 30 years.
What school did you teach down there?
Well, my situation with the schools was somewhat different. I left twice to go back to school, both to BYU and back to Utah State. I got my master's at BYU and Utah State. I got my doctorate degree. And so I kept cutting up in and out of the school district. And so every time I come back, I got into school. But I became involved as an elementary school principal, and I was shifted around a number of times. To make a long story short, by the end of my tenure, I had worked in more than 30 schools.
Wow.
And so when he says, "Which schools do I work at?" I'm not really sure any longer.
Did you enjoy teaching school?
I did, but when the time came, it was time to quit.
You were ready to...
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good. Then your timing was good. So, did you? What was when you left Mesquite? What was the biggest shock? I mean, you had grown up in this little tiny rural town, and to get out into the world, and what was? I mean, it was a big world out there, wasn't it? After.
Well, it was a little bit for me, but let me go back to my father again. He tells me stories. He tells me the story of. Well, let me go back even further than that. When the pioneers came to the valley, of course, they left civilization basically behind. And they brought with them their own culture and so forth. But when the children came, the children did not have that background that their parents had. And as they looked upon the valley and the nearness of the neighboring valleys that they go visit their relatives and so forth, it was one thing. But when one of the boys grew up to the point where he had a chance to go further, he went to Salt Lake City for some reason. And when he returned, he was mystified. He couldn't get over it, the distance. And he says, if the world is as big that direction, pointing towards that direction, as it is in that direction, it's a big world.
It's a big world. I think it must have been a real shock. I know for my grandfather, too, to have left as a young man to go out into the big world. It was mind-boggling where were so close. And you're right, their parents had come from that world. So for them it wasn't. For the generation born in these small areas, it really was. Electricity. Do you remember having electricity all your life?
Well, I was born in 1935, the same year as the Boulder Dam was finished. And so electricity didn't make it to Mesquite until a number of years later, probably 4 or 5 years. Excuse me. We're told that when the electricity did come into the valley, it made its way, first of all, to Bunkerville, which is closest to there. And people from the power company sent out somebody to sign up people for the electric power. And they could sign up for a month at a time for $4 a month.
No matter how much you used?
That's straight for $4 a month for a month. And later, of course, then as it continued to come across the river to Mesquite, and we were on the far end of town, I still remember as a boy seeing the power people and the poles and the power lines go in up through the fields to our ranch house. And
so you could see power coming.
You see it coming. The only problem is once we got it there, it didn't work. And my dad went downtown to find out why, and it turned out to be that the switch needed to be thrown.
Yes, kind of like getting doors open to buildings. Yes, can be already.
So after he threw the switch, the power worked fine. Except for one time I was out there herding the cows into the barn, and I was flipping a baling wire around and up in the line, and it shorted the power circuit out. But I didn't dare tell my father for quite a while. I finally told him, and he took a long stick out there and took it off, and it broke again. So.
Oh. Where'd you go swimming?
The big canal is the best and only swimming hole in the whole world.
The Frehner Hole.
Yeah.
Yep.
We had rope swings that we tied from the trees over the ditch. It would swing out over and back across the water.
Over old tamarask trees. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That was my growing up too, swimming in Frehner Hole. It's the only swimming pool I knew. Anything else before we move on? Anything you'd like to talk about the first pioneers coming in? Any stories that your family has handed down?
Oh, there's so many, and I think probably your previous meetings like this before probably have covered a lot of them, and so I didn't prepare a lot of things that may have happened there, but there were a lot of things that did happen. I was really amazed at the stories about the difficulty in Mesquite getting established, and the 3 times it took for them, 3 attempts to get the water in the canal dug, and so forth, and the water into the... Yeah. And the last time, of course, after 2 previous failures, there was 3 men who came into the valley and from somewhere and left. I shouldn't say left. They organized the community into groups and showed some little bit of leadership, and sent somebody up to the mountains for posts, somebody up in mid-Utah for a highway to fix seal wire fencing and so forth. And of course, the pictures outside the walls here talk about the days of the canal and the dam, which is a constant thing to us. Even in my days, every rainstorm washed the dam out. Yeah. And they tried to get new trees and bushes to put in there. But they got to the point where the trees and bushes were so scarce for miles around, they couldn't get anything to bring to it. And so finally they had to build a permanent one. Yeah. Which is very good.
Yeah, it was very, very difficult getting established. Well, Verl, the last time I saw you, you gave me some books, and I went home and have just been fascinated by them. So I've got questions about how you ever got started in beginning to understand the early inhabitants of this area.
Okay, let me do one thing first.
Okay.
This kind of tells you.
Okay.
That's you.
That sure is.
Okay. We've talked some about Mesquite so far. Number 2, I want to have a little intermediate step here between what we're talking about and what we're going to talk about later as far as the books are concerned. Because there is something interesting here. If my wife, who's my best partner here, if she'll get that big map there that on the top, this is put the whole. Yeah, okay. Can you read that? I can't. Okay. Jeremiah Smith. Anyway, he one of his travels came through Mesquite, and he was the first white man to make a place. Not the word I'm looking for. A route through the Nevada into California, I think. And that shows a map of it. And following him, Next picture. There was a series of people who came through here, the Spanish explorers, and which again shows his route through here. But the point I want to make here, though, is that the Spanish explorers had different aims and goals than Jeremiah Smith. And besides the Spanish explorers, there were other groups of people, all kinds of people who came through the valley, anywhere from missionaries to thieves to slave traders to you name it. They used this route for all kinds of things. The one thing I'd like to bring your attention to was that there was also a group of slave traders who, and I'm not sure who they were, but they apparently collected the Indians from the area and made slaves out of them and took them elsewhere to use them as slaves. When the Mormon pioneers were digging the ditches, and especially at the point where the cut is, they call it the cut, somewhere near that point, they dug up two skeletons. And these two skeletons were joined together at the ankles with a steel brace, or steel coupling, or steel control. Apparently, the slave traders had brought them this far, and something happened that one of them must have died, or both of them died. But if one of them died, the other was probably shot, or died of the same process. But we have that part of our history also, and the slave trade that came through this area. Now let's go into the books. Because we have, I can't see you if I put my glasses off, and I can't see this if I put them on, so I'm going to take them off and look this. The Founders' Day for the area of Mesquite, the Virgin Valley, and Wampa Valley has happened many times over the past. It's happened as people of different tribes and so forth entered the valley and became established here for many, many years. The books that I have over here sitting on the table are the stories of three incidences that happened to one clan of American Indians. You know, we as people of the modern time, we like to tell stories of our history. We like to record our history stories and tell our neighbors and so forth their years to come. We like to write books, volumes of books of stories about the area. These people were no different. These people wanted people to know about them. These people wanted whoever followed them, whoever it was, whether it was Indians or whether it was whoever, they didn't know who would be following them. They wanted to be known for what had happened to them. And so the stories were written in petroglyphs. And petroglyphs have no vocal sounds to them. They have ideas that are generated by signs, and these signs then were interpreted into symbols, and the symbols were written, and these symbols contain the stories that they left behind. And the stories are interesting, the stories are sad, the stories are challenging. And some of the challenges that they had, of course, are so important to them that they wanted to make sure that they were recorded. Now, this first story I'm going to talk to you about is about their migration. They liked to always leave, if they could, stories about where they came from. When they came to this valley, they came from somewhere, and they did come from somewhere, and so they left a story telling about that story of where they came from. We Are the Ones is the picture on the far side over there on the wall, and it is a picture depicting one location that this people came from, and it shows the Grand Canyon. And let me tell you the story about how they got to the Grand Canyon. They left the top of Navajo Mountain, and that's where their story starts. And they traveled northeast to the forest area, just above that area. And then from that area, they went across the Colorado River above the Green River Convergence. After they crossed the Green River Convergence, after they crossed the Colorado River, they went to the convergence where the Green River and the Colorado River met. And from the top of the hillside where they had come to, they could see the Green River below them. And any of you who know the story of the Green River area and the convergence where the two rivers join will know that that particular place is called, and the Green River is called Stillwater Canyon. And it's called Stillwater Canyon because the water runs still. There's no rapids at that area. And the traveling Indians already knew that, and they knew where they could cross the river more peacefully. And so at that point, they crossed that river, and they sent a man up to the far side of the canyon to see what was beyond, to see which way they should travel. And they found out that it was pretty gorgy all the way down across this way, south of that location, and so they took a roundabout route to the area now that's known as the North Rim of the Grand Canyon. And I'm going to back up just a second. I'm going to show you a picture of the convergence of the Green River and the Colorado River. Okay. The one on the bottom here is a picture of Navajo Mountain. This is the convergence of the Colorado. The Colorado comes from this area here. The Green River comes on this side here, and they converge and mix the waters together and join on down the river to there. And letter A shows where they depicted where they came to and looked down upon the river before they crossed it. This over here, of course, is the gorge that comes down from the north rim of the Grand Canyon. And when I was in college in southern Utah, I was also a tour bus driver for the Utah parks. And so I began to understand some of the things here. I was told that the route that they take now on their hike from one rim to the other was made following the Indian pathway that was already made there by the Indians as they travel back and forth. And so, knowing that, then it was easy to understand that they had gone to that point and crossed on down to the river below, and again crossed the river. Now, if you stop and think a minute, you'll recognize that that's kind of a difficult situation to do, to cross a river, especially if you're talking about men, women, children, babies, whatever goods they were carrying, pregnant women, and so forth, because this clan was moving as a total unit to establish themselves somewhere that they could make a living, and so forth. They climbed the others up the side of the hill, then on the south side, and they encountered tremendous difficulties in climbing the steep rock hill cliffs right next to the top of the hills. And they recorded that fact in their story. They were also very impressed with the high, tall trees found on both the north rim and the south rim of the Grand Canyon. They also found that there were other people living there. They found that the hunting was good, there was a good place to live, except somebody else had claimed the area before them. And in doing so, they were told, just keep going, don't stop here. And because of the determination of those who were already there, they had to flee for their lives. in order to escape. They continued their tour on down until they finally crossed the Colorado River again and entered the Virgin River Valley. Now, if we look at that as the foundation of one of our foundations, we can do that. Because after they entered the valley and they searched it out diligently, they made a decision. The decision was to split up into two groups because there were two areas in the valley that had fresh water, fresh spring water running all the time. One was Warm Springs, the other one was Beaver Dam. And so I learned that from the story, the Nettle Rock Calamity. And so everything happened. So this is what they did. Now, when they established themselves here in the valley, they had another pattern they set among themselves, and this is the pattern they had. We recognize that summer heat here is terrible, but the mountains are close by. And so what they did is they created a mini migration every year. In the spring, they would leave the valley, or at least a portion of them, and they traveled up from below Overton, up that slope, to the Bunkville Mountains where they hunt for the winter, hunt for the summer. In the fall, they would come back down to the valleys, and that cycle would continue, hunting and harvesting and so forth. Now, this is where the second story comes into being right here, because the offense of the evil man enters the picture here because halfway up the slope that I've just described to you is a series of cliffs, different colored white cliffs where you can write stories, but more important than that, these cliffs had small and large cisterns created by the water running and so forth. And when it rained, the water would fill those cisterns full of water, and the people coming up from the valley, it would take 10 miles to walk from there to this place where they could re-water themselves, and water was a very scarce entity. And then they would go, after they watered and rested, then the next day they would travel on to the mountains, which is another 10 miles where they could do some more hunting. But what happened here is one of the men that was with him was a psychologically disturbed individual, and the story tells us these characteristics were very evident. And he polluted the water holes with his human waste, and it fermented, and it was drank by a few of the people, and there were a number of people who got sick, and a number of people ill and died. And because of this, they really were on this man's case. They tried to argue with him, they tried to reason with him, they couldn't do that. They tried to find a solution to the problem, which is not apparent. Finally, they decided that they had to go on regardless of what happened. And so they decided that they better solve the problem of the man. And they did this by capturing him. They tied him up and put him in a secure place. And then they took him to a cliff after they had 2 or 3 councils of what to do with him, and threw him off the cliff and killed him. And they've recorded later this story, because once they've gone the route, of course they didn't have time to stop then, but they went back to their locale in the valley. They would plan this story out, and then the next time or 2 or 3 times that they came through, they would go back to the site, they would record the story. And the story is recorded at that site that I just talked to you about. So this story then is a very important story because it affected everybody. It was one that the people recognized was going to be long talked about. It was going to be one long remembered, and sorrow was going to be there for many years because the loved ones that they lost at that site. Now, let me flip to another story, because this next story is also recorded. And this story talks about a man and a boy, one from Warm Springs and one from Beaver Dams. And I'm not sure which one was which which boy and which man was from which location. But by some prior arrangement, they had arranged to meet at the convergence of the Muddy River and the Virgin River down below Overton. And the purpose of this meeting was to take the atlatl throwing spear that they used in those days, about 2,500 years ago. And this is about the time that the archaeologists say that they lived here, 2,500 years ago, possibly. They took these atlatl throwing spears, and they, if you know what an atlatl is, it's just got this long, and then a long arrow. And by using the leverage, they could throw it with great distance, great speed. And with the skill that they could develop, then they could use it for hunting. But the man and the boy was to use this and took on to the we know now as the Valley of Fire, and they spent a month there practicing survival and hunting skills. And one day, after they'd gone through about a month of this exercise, on the far end of the Valley of Fire, they saw against this rocky red hill, about 60 feet up, some petroglyphs that previous people had written. And so the boy climbed up on the hill, and the hill was at the top of it, where the petroglyphs were written, was only about a yard wide or so, and it was on a slope. Somehow he lost his balance and tumbled and tumbled and tumbled all the way down that hillside, which was solid rock hillside. And he miraculously lived, but just barely. The man eventually was able to get him to a hole in the cliffs where he could help him survive. And at that point, maintained the time there to help him do that, improve that condition. Later, whenever he was, and I don't know whether it was determined by the seasons, or whether determined by the lack of food, or whether determined by now was the time that had to take place, but they decided that they had to make an attempt to go home. The boy, in the process, had lost a leg at the knee, which means it was amputated, using whatever sharp instruments they had at the time, I suppose. And they went a few yards from their hole, or their place where they lived, and they stopped, and they offered up a prayer. Strange as it may seem, they raised their arms to their God, and beseeched his aid and assistance in getting home. And now, because the boy was still so lame and had a wooden crutch at the time, they only made 2.5 miles a day going down that wash to the Virgin River, which took them probably about 5 days to get down to the river. When they reached the river, the man left the boy by the water and then ran back to whichever home he had to go to. I'm not sure which one. It took him 2.5 days to run that mileage. And he notified, of course, the people, and apparently the father and brother and maybe a mother returned on very speedily to find the other boy. The father, I think, made the trip back in 1.5 days. So you can see the urgency with which he had for getting back to his son. They were successful in bringing him home, and then there was a period of time of reflection that's recorded on the petroglyphs. And this period of reflection tells us that they had conquered the fear that they had experienced at that place, and that they conquered this fear, and they felt good about it, and they were able to put it aside. Now, there are 3 books over here that I have translated and decoded. This is one that's in the process of being decoded right now. I have called it A Mountain to Match Our Message. It likewise is found, maybe you could put that in the just on the picture there so you see it. Oh, sorry. A mountain to match our message. That sounds a little strange until let me tell you the background of it. This story is a retelling of the story of the evil man. But this time, they wanted to find a very dominant place where it could be told. And they found such a place within a short distance, relatively short distance of where it happened, on the side of a big mountain. And after planning for a number of years, apparently, and writing the story on animal skin, probably, they took this animal skin and all of the people and the instruments necessary back to the site where they were to record this. And they recorded again the story of the events of the evil man, except this time they did not talk about the evil man. You can't even find him mentioned. You can't even find in a story anything that related to him. Apparently somebody had decided that this part of the story was told once, and they didn't want to write it again. I also feel that probably the family of the man and friends of the man didn't want this story retold and retold because they were suffering also. But whatever the reason, they totally disregarded the man who caused it and told about what happened to them. And they told us a lot more information that they had left out of the other story. And this story was, again, so important that they took the time, they took the location, they went out of their way to record it as they wished to have it recorded. Now this site that is here was just discovered in 1996 or 8 or something like that. It's just a relatively new site. And it's not one that they want to advertise because they don't want people to go there to destroy it. So don't ask me where it's at, I won't tell you. But this is the story. And the story tells us that some of the things it tells us in this story that did not tell in the other story was the number of days. It took them 30 days at the site before they could actually move out of it because of the illnesses and the deaths that were there and the fact that they had to stay there and take care of people and each other. The water was taken, the water was used up for the part that could be used, and the water that was not used, could not be used, was done away with. They were constantly looking at the opportunities to leave the site. Time and time again in their stories, they went to the point of saying, "We'd like to go, we need to go," but they're tied into the situation. They also told about the latter days of the event when water was so scarce that they actually showed them controlling the water that was drank until it was almost absolutely gone. And when the water that was to be drank was also at least the point where there was no longer to be had, that was the day they left. The people who were still ill, and the people who were well enough to travel, and the people in between held a lot of councils with each other, and they talked with each other, and they recognized what had to happen. You either had to leave and go back down to the river and get water 10 miles away, or you had to leave and go on to the mountains to your hunting camp, or you had to stay there and die. Those are the three choices. And there were people in each of those three choices who had to stay there, who had to do one or the other. And so there were those who went on to the hunting grounds, which is the greatest majority. There was a small majority of them who went back to the river to live, and there were those who were there who died on the spot because they couldn't go either way. So you can see it was a very emotional thing. Those who were there near the last and had to have water, no matter what kind of water it was, were so sick that they couldn't travel and walk, had to crawl on their knees. And crawling on their knees, they left a bloody trail from where they were to where the pots of water could be found. And so you can see that was a very important story, and a very memorable story for the people who lived it. And so there was the reason I named it A Mountain to Match Our Message. Both of them very dominant, very important, very strong. Now, I've included these stories in today's presentation because I feel very strongly that this is part of our history. It's part of our history that has happened, and it is for us to understand and appreciate. Now, we have books that we put up on the wall and in the libraries and so forth. The only thing they could do was to write on rocks. They had nothing else to write on that would stay very long. And so these have come down to us now for probably over 2,500 years, 2,500 years. And they're informative, they're heart-rending, and they're well written. The editing job that they did on this last story was something that an English major in college would be proud to do.
They were great. I will never look at a petroglyph the same again. The detail that was evident in the person who inscribed those on the, and the way that you brought those out, I had never realized how subtle and how tiny little changes in a figure or a symbol could make a whole difference, could imply so much, and it could be interpreted. And I think you've done a wonderful job, because I certainly grew up here without being aware of predecessors of, that far back. We always recognized, yes, there probably were Native Americans that came through here and that was probably nomadic, but to have evidence like this and to have stories that's just like our family stories, important events that happened that were very crucial to their existence, to their survival. So I think it's wonderful what you've done, and I'm fascinated how you came about this interest or this access to these sites.
Well, about year 2000, 2001, I was reading a booklet which is on the table over here called Rocks Begin to Speak by Levan Martineau. He was a French Indian from Cedar City, Utah, and he was in the army in Korea and was in the. He was the guy that told the traffic to go ahead and back. But he was in the constant house next to those people who were doing the decoding of enemy messages. And so he learned the system of decoding, and he used those skills when he got back from his service, military service, to research the Indian petroglyphs. And he did a very good job of it, by the way. And he spent his whole life doing that. And he wrote that book, and he included many of the symbols and their meanings inside of it. And one day, while I was reading his book, I was also asked if I'd seen some petroglyphs on the other side of the mountain. I said, no, I hadn't seen those. So my friend took me over, and we looked at them, and I saw some similarities between what was in the book and what was written on the box shelves. And so I began to, bit by bit, item by item, identify what they meant. And just as I began to do so, after the first two or three things, a story just began to emerge automatically right out of those pictures. And so it takes a lot of thought and concentration and thinking like the Indian thought when you do it to get those pictures to talk to you.
Well, I know, being a librarian here in Mesquite for 27 years, and that book was a very important part of my collection for local people, and a lot of people would come in and borrow that book and claim they were going to go out and conquer the world interpreting petroglyphs, but you're the only person who I found who've been successful in uncovering these mysteries that, because the average person will look at a petroglyph as non-related, symbols and that, but for a petroglyph to be a complete story, a complete tale, self-contained, is a concept that I don't believe people were grasping. So I applaud you. I think it's just marvelous, and these books are a wonderful addition to the collection of the history of the Valley. And I understand that you've written another book on another interesting person who maybe not exactly in this valley, but Howard Hughes. What was your connection there?
Well, Howard Hughes had a group of people that met his every need. We called them the inside aides and the outside aides. The inside aides were those who lived in the rooms with him. The outside aides were outside the door that was locked and took care of people outside the aid. And one of the inside aides was a friend of mine who I met in Las Vegas when I lived there. And we lived in the same vicinity, and I get to know him, and we talked a little bit, and our talks began to delve into a possibility of a book, and he had a number of other people approach him, but he didn't feel comfortable with that. But I finally convinced him that he had enough information that it would be worthwhile for that to be written, so that people could see the inside Howard Hughes that is not known outside of that book. And so, because of that, I was able to do a lot of research to back up what he was saying, and also take what he was saying and weave it into the story that he thought was good. His name was Chuck Waldron, and his involvement with Howard Hughes lasted many years afterwards because of the court cases and so forth. But he ended up, like the other people that worked for Howard Hughes, flat broke. They didn't receive anything, and they had to spend everything that they didn't receive to help defend their case. And so he went into the painting business, of all things. He painted houses. He painted their house. And anyway, at the time I started writing the book, it was already 10 years too late. And then I had a stroke, which made me incapable of doing writing, so I sat at the typewriter with one finger and did a few things. Over the years, I finally got it written and finally published it. But it's a very interesting book, and it's very. If you want to know about Howard Hughes' behind the scene, you can find it.
Well, it just sounds like you like solving mysteries and delving into the unknown. That's fascinating. That goes along with this. Well, in the interest of time, and to give you a little bit of a break, I want people to think about if there are any questions that they have for Verl. It sounds like he knows an awful lot. And I'd like to offer anyone with any questions for Mr. Frehner. See, you've just you've just answered everything. Well, I'm just really pleased that you were able to be here tonight. I think you show a side of maybe people who've grown up here that we haven't seen before, because you were one of the few that we've had who have actually left the valley and gone out and then returned and then come home. So, and I was sitting here thinking about the other members of your family who have been writers or who have had kind of a scholarly approach to things, and do you think that was any involved in how you were raised, how you grew up, why your interests kind of...
You have me there. I'm not really sure what caused it.
Well, Dorothy, your sister Dorothy, who wrote this wonderful book about the valley and researching and things like that, because not all of us have grown up wanting to do that, and sometimes people think that maybe our education was not of...
one of the things that we were taught when we were younger was that when you go to college and you write a thesis, it has to be very detailed. I found out later that's not the case. But Dorothy still thought that was the case when she went to college. She thought she had to produce something of magnitude, and so she wrote a river, and a road. And this then became her most important book, I guess, to write, as far as that's concerned. But it's interesting because the people around her during that college career that she went through had little thin 20-page things they handed in, but she had to do it right. She had to do it complete.
And yeah, she did a wonderful job. And we're really grateful. I'm grateful for having known the Frehner family. I've known some very special Frehners in my life that have been just really wonderful friends. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us tonight about Mesquite, about why you came back?
Well, I couldn't find any place I liked better, and so I returned.
That's the right answer.
And not only that, but I had invested a little bit of time and energy in some land out in scenic Arizona, and so I had to finish that project that I was all involved in, and was successful in getting the road and the bridge built into the area. So
I think you've been very influential out there. That's certainly a different area than it was in the days when you were growing up or in Littlefield area, to look across that river and see the slope, which is now just really populated. So that's been very...
I'd like to tell you one little story, if I can, about when I was in the 5th grade in Mesquite, recess time, afternoon recess. As I looked down west, basically, I could see something that amazed me. I finally decided it was an airplane, but you couldn't see the airplane, it was too far away. But behind this airplane that was so small you couldn't see it, 75 miles away or so, was a large plume of smoke. My first thought was it was a plane on fire. I've been watching war movies long enough to know that airplanes caught on fire and crashed and so forth. But this airplane didn't crash, it just kind of kept looping and going around in circles and back and forth with a big plume of smoke. And it had to be an airplane because nothing else would do that. Well, years later I found out that we were just beginning to enter the jet age.
So the plume of smoke, okay.
The plume of smoke was just was an experimental plane that they were trying out for, but I wasn't sure what it was.
Were you here during the atomic testing here?
Very much so, yes.
Yeah. What did you think of that? How old were you? You would have been 20, maybe?
Oh, no, a little younger than that. I was in high school.
That's right. You were still in high school.
I was still in school, I should say.
So.
I'll tell you a couple of stories there because two, three stories. One, of course, we had a home down here near my grandfather's place. We had a basement. We had a small window in the basement. And we had a shade that we pulled down and curtains we pulled sideways. And when one of those bombs went off, the light came through there, so it might have woke me up. It woke me up out of a dead sleep because it passed through that small hole, those two things in the middle of them, and lit up the whole room. Another thing, I was standing outside the house one day, looking across the highway down towards the river, and when that bomb went off, the light was so brilliant that I could see the twigs of the bushes across the river. And that really amazed me because it taught me that there was enough impurities in the air between there and here, and enough not light that you couldn't see it otherwise. But you could see the bushes, you could see everything about the bushes, every leaf on the bush practically. Anyway, so much for that.
And so did you feel safe? I mean, did you feel threatened or by that testing?
I was still too ignorant. I was safe. I felt safe. Mm-hmm. I was enjoying the sights at the time.
Yeah. My family was on a trip to California, unaware. They usually announced, but we were unaware that there was a test, and we always left very early in the morning before sunrise to go to California through the heat. And blast went off, and it was, brighter than noonday sun. It literally was just, but we knew instantly what it was. It was, instant and then dark again. But it is funny how we just incorporate it in our lives. It happened fairly frequently. It didn't interrupt our lives too much, except for the days when they felt like it might blow over Mesquite. But anyway, yeah, that was just part of growing up. Part of growing up in Mesquite.
One more thing here. Let me just tell you about, while these tests were going on, one morning, sometimes it's before dawn, sometimes it's in the daylight. This particular test was done in the daylight. It was mid-morning. And there was a whole group of airplanes, quads of 4 airplanes per unit. I think there were 16 of them, if I remember correctly. And I noticed that they had 4 jets, streamers from each wing, which must have been the largest they had. And they came to Mesquite, and they started circling over Mesquite. And they stayed that way for about 15 minutes, and finally they all head toward to the test site. So this is the staging point, I guess, for that particular test. And they went and disappeared, and so I went on about my work, and about the time I went up, I was looking up again, and this time I could see every airplane silhouetted way down there. It was that bright.
Yep. Those of us who've been there, we all have our memories. All right. So, has anyone thought of any questions? Well, I think Verl may be getting tired. He's warned me that his voice is but he's done a wonderful job. He's very eloquent and articulate, and we're just really pleased to have had him here. I'm pleased to know you, and I'm just really pleased to see what wonderful contributions you've made to the history of the Valley. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I guess that's it.
Did you? Okay. Verl would like to recognize the artist who painted these paintings. Golden Millward is here. If you, Golden. Did I say
Yeah.
Because I didn't know, but I felt like, perfect.